Well, I promised you that I was going to show you around after a couple of weeks and update you on the garden. So here it is. Have a look at the difference in just, I think it's about 3 weeks. I find container growing quite high maintenance, so I generally avoid it. But I've got these pepinos growing on my veranda because the critters were getting to all of the plants that were down in the garden. Now we've got on top of that issue a bit, but these are growing incredibly happily, and the irrigation seems to have been enough for them in that 2 weeks where I couldn't water the garden. I've even got a little capsicum popped up and fruited without me realising it was even in there. There's also a little one to the side in a side pot that looked dead by the time I came back to it because it didn't have any irrigation and it wasn't hand watered. But in 2 days it looked very green, like you see here. The raised beds thrived and the tomatoes really took off, but I had a little bit of blossom end rot. It's really hard to regulate the water on tomatoes when they're interplanted when you've got an automated system. So they were getting more than they needed in my absence, but I did notice that the gaps, some parts of these beds were quite dry. So it was getting water where the irrigation was, but missing spots. And as I'm like to fill all the gaps with seeds and more veggies, which I did upon my return. I put beetroot and smaller plants in between. I had to ensure that they got hand watered, so I'm doing a bit of hand watering. One of the most notable differences was in my arbor section. I had grouped the pots together to try and make sure the sprinkler would hit them when it was going, but the squash plant really took off. And in the wire bed, I had vegetables pop up and take off that I didn't realise I had. So I have some kind of collard greens here to harvest, and they're looking very healthy. Now this garden bed was looking particularly pretty when I got back because the alyssum was out in flower and sort of intermixed in amongst the vegetables. It looked very cottagey. I had a lot of seed heads to harvest and collect and cut back, but we come home to a lot of big jobs like this one. The mulberry was full of mulberries. The cutting back of that plant, it responded so well. It just boomed after I cut it back in a very short time and threw out a heap of fruit. I must show you how I did that in a future video, but in the meantime I need to think about netting it because the birds get them otherwise. Now look at that spaghetti squash. Let me show you the before and afters. It's full of flowers, and only a few days after this video was taken, it had about 3 or 4 times as many. They are all males at the moment, but that will change. So this is the left-hand side of my archway before I left my garden for a couple of weeks. So the bean had just hooked itself, the first little bean had just hooked itself onto the bottom arbor. Well, I think I might have helped that a little. I had transplanted some spring onions and salad burnet here, and there was a little bean plants just showing their way through the soil, and that right there is the squash, which I had mulched with a little bit of marjoram and not much else here. And I came back to so many self-sown little plants. So we had these brassicas, which I'm pretty sure are Brussels sprouts, and they were popped up everywhere. I did try and move some, but we had hot weather, so not a lot survived when I moved them. And on the right side of the arbour, the yarrow, the ginger, feverfew, and everything that was in there pretty much took off. So they managed to get enough water, thankfully. And I come back this time from being away from my garden feeling much better. I do have a house sitter, but I can't rely on the house sitter to do my garden. Now over here in the corner, this is the corner where I buried my best little pal, and under the avocado tree, and everything is growing in there but the weeds also. So we're going to do some work edging to try and keep the weeds out. The scarlet runner beans are at full height, and there's lots of seeds in the garden to be collected and repurposed around the place. And that's the wonderful thing about collecting your own seeds. You just multiply your food or your plants all over the place. And there's very little lost when you've got thousands of seeds or hundreds of seeds or dozens of seeds coming off a plant for free. And to my delight, the cassava is growing this time. This is my second attempt at growing cassava in Melbourne, and not the ideal climate, but we've got lots of heat at the moment. And I don't know how it'll go in this hugelkultur bed. There's not a lot of soil in there. The whole compost bin was emptied out into there, but the other plants that I bought, the little seedlings that I bought before I went away, are thriving. Especially the stevia. Look at that, it's probably 3 times the height. So I was so excited to have grapes. First time ever I've had grapes. Heaps of bunches, and I had to cover it up. So I've covered them up because I've got these blackbirds that are coming in and eating them. So they're not ready to pick, but the little grapes are ripening at different rates. So some are green and some are pinkish, and they're meant to go a little bit darker. And so they're picking off the pink ones. So I've covered up, and they've managed to open it again today, and I've just gone in and seen that they've eaten a heap more. So I'm just hoping we get some. So they've eaten most of them, but I'm still hoping we get some for all that effort. But they did get in, unfortunately, so I only ended up with the bagged grapes. So I know for next year to bag them all. Forget about the netting. One bird managed to chop one of the bagged grapes even off at the stem. We found it on the ground, but only after the ants had got to it. So the ants enjoyed the sweet, juicy grapes too. But the good news is I have grapes now, and they are a beautiful flavour. And we're always going to lose some of our plants to the wildlife. So I'm back in the studio now. It's getting hot, but I just want to thank you for joining me in my little garden tour. The main reason I have this YouTube channel is because I'm trying to grow organically. I'm trying to encourage others to grow a bit for themselves, because our food chain is toxic. And the more that we grow, the healthier we will be. And our kids need to learn these things too. If the information's not out there for our kids to see and to digest, the future generations really need it. So I'm glad that you joined me and that you've seen the video all the way through to the end. And I have plans to actually show you the canning process too. A lot of my friends have asked, Kayleen, how do you can food? A lot of people in Australia don't do it. and a lot of my friends are interested in canning food, and so I'm going to put together some videos and show you that, and a little bit of healthy cooking as well at some stage. So I've got a busy life. I paint, family and that, but I'm trying to share all I can on YouTube for you all out there. So thanks for watching. I would just love if you put any comments in, that you can, so that I can read them and respond, and perhaps, create content around what you'd like to see. But it really helps my channel, and in the end it helps everyone if it can get out there. So bless you. Thanks for joining me, and yeah, have a good week.